Now let's talk about this historic landmark decision coming out of the United States Supreme Court related to college admissions. I have posted for your convenience the entire decision in the community section. And so if you would like to read that, you can. It's extensive, just like all of those cases are, but it is there for you to use, to read, to review. You can also scan through the document to find important parts of the document. Important parts, of course, are going to be the statement of facts that have been presented by the justices, also the law related to what it is that they are considering. There's also the holding, the court's decision, and you're going to have the court's rationale. You're going to have a procedural history so that it tells you what's been going on before we got to this final decision. And there's also going to be some dissenting opinions, some opinions that don't agree with what the court has determined. What we are going to be focusing on is this interesting use of language and this interesting use of language that has been used to confuse and confound people for quite a while. Some people believe that diversity and affirmative action or affirmative actions are synonymous. They are not. But they are used in that way to create confusion. There's no other explanation for this. There's no way that individuals who are using this language, there's no way that they don't know that there is a distinction, and there's no way that they don't know, and by they, I'm talking about institutions such as Harvard. There's no way that they don't know that diversity is about a social construct and affirmative action has a legal foundation to it. And so that in and of itself is a part of the reason why the court has been struggling with this entire dynamic. Now, this is very important for a number of reasons. For those of you who are talking about reparations and restitution and things like that, based upon ancestral history, you want to make note of this because what you are talking about are affirmative types of actions. Diversity, however, is not really about affirmative types of actions legally. Now, of course, there are affirmative actions going on with respect to diversity, but that's not what it's really about. And so, what has happened is individuals who have been fighting for restitution, fighting for repair. They are fighting for affirmative actions. And those fights have served to open the door for diversity. And so some individuals think that they are getting their affirmative actions, but in some instances, the fight for affirmative action actually gets undermined by the fight for diversity. They are not the same things. And sometimes those individuals who fight for these affirmative actions and open the door for diversity, they are the individuals who often get left behind. And the Supreme Court has noted this in its decision, and a number of writers have also noted this. And so, what we're going to do is just quickly go over the distinctions between diversity and affirmative actions so that you will know. And again, there are implications related to the reparations discussions that will be growing out of these discussions because, in some ways, the reparations discussions are about, again, affirmative actions. But you have some individuals who are advancing the reparations discussions in a way that is sort of a social justice or diversity argument. And that's not going to take you very far in court, as you can see with this most recent decision. Again, the Supreme Court justices are pretty savvy, and so they are able to pick up the distinctions and see the holes in the arguments in terms of the law. And we've talked about this before. You don't want to mix those legal arguments with those social justice arguments. They are not the same arguments. Both are important, but they are not the same arguments. And one can actually undermine the other. This is Dr. Tracy McCarthy, psychologist, attorney, and educator. And so we've talked about this before, so we're just going to touch on it again. In looking at these distinctions between diversity actions and affirmative actions, diversity really is about a social dynamic. And so, if you were looking at it through that sort of reparations lens or that restitution lens, diversity would be where you would make sure that everybody who's under a phenotype umbrella, those diverse phenotypes under that umbrella, that those individuals all have a certain type of access, or those individuals all get access to reparations. And you hear that argument that all Black people in America should receive reparations. Um, that's not going to take you very far. I'm going to tell you this legally, it's not going to take you where some of you think it's going to take you. It's just not. And as a matter of fact, it's going to undermine any type of repair or any type of restitution. And you see some of this pointed out in this recent Supreme Court decision, where there is this attempt to treat people of a particular phenotype or skin color as a monolith. And so you also have here this affirmative actions dynamic, which is founded in the law. And so, with respect to affirmative actions, that sort of legal repair versus a social type of repair, you have things like indigenous restitution. There is a foundation for the repair. There is a foundation, a legal foundation for the positive or affirmative action. Then you have individuals who are descendants of enslaved persons, and the reparations that would go along with that. Those are legal dynamics. Those are not diversity arguments. Those are affirmative action legal arguments. And so you will hear in the media them using diversity and affirmative action interchangeably. Don't get caught up in that. When you hear affirmative action, you should be thinking the law. When they are talking affirmative action, however, they are not really talking about the law. They are really talking about diversity, but trying to use affirmative action to push that diversity door open. And again, that dynamic can actually undermine the legal arguments that are related to true affirmative actions. And so, again, remember, diversity is simply about difference. It's about heterogeneity versus homogeneity. And it could be based upon a number of constructs, but that's what diversity is all about. That inclusion is all about. That equity is all about. It's related to difference. It's not about righting a wrong. And here you have an image of what diversity is representing. One of the reasons why this case has been decided the way it has been decided is because there has been a long string of cases related to this issue that have moved from some of those affirmative action arguments to what was seen as a more palatable argument of diversity. And so institutions were able to float this diversity idea um, in exchange for the affirmative action ideal. And this is what we have here now based upon the diversity arguments. And so this is the image that's supposed to represent in some ways diversity, and it's distinct from the image that represents affirmative action. However, affirmative action is the image that is used in order to facilitate the diversity argument. So we're going to look at the affirmative action image. And so here you see the image that has been used to undergird the diversity arguments. The affirmative action image, or the wrong that has given rise to a need for affirmative action, that's the image that is used in order to, again, undergird the diversity argument. And so what people see is slavery. What people see is Jim Crow. What people are presented with is sharecropping. And all of this is used to manipulate the public mind related to the diversity argument, because the diversity argument and the slavery argument, the Jim Crow argument, the sharecropping argument, the convict leasing argument, those things do not all hang together, and the Supreme Court knows this. And so what has happened is the people represented in this image, or their descendants, um, their narrative is used to actually benefit people other than themselves. And so oftentimes, as the court has recognized, those individuals are least likely to actually benefit from some of these diversity initiatives with respect to these Ivy League schools in particular. There has also been some indication that there has been some actual discrimination against the individuals who are represented by the affirmative action image, that slavery descendant image, that indigenous image. There has been some indication that they have been discriminated against because out of the brown people, or what some people might refer to as Black people, they are considered less desirable than other individuals who would be coming into the country. And so, in many ways, they are discriminated against based upon them being used, or their narrative being used, to open the door for other people to benefit. And so the Supreme Court is aware of this. The Supreme Court actually discusses this, and a number of researchers have also discussed this, including um, Lonnie Guinier. Dr. Lonnie Guinier also discussed this issue. And so, again, remember, affirmative action and diversity are not the same things. However, the affirmative action narrative is used in order to undergird the diversity argument. And so when you hear individuals talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, affirmative action, make sure that you understand what narrative these dynamics are founded upon. What are we talking about here? Are we really talking about affirmative action, or are we simply talking about diversity and inclusion? Affirmative action, of course, should lead to inclusion in some instances. However, it doesn't necessarily have to. And diversity, equity, inclusion might not lead to affirmative action or righting these historic wrongs. Now let's solidify this by looking at some basic definitions and understandings of diversity versus affirmative action. And so the American Bar Association defines diversity as the term used to describe the set of policies, practices, and programs that change the rhetoric of inclusion into empirically measurable change. Okay, that's probably not what many of you were thinking when you were thinking about diversity or affirmative action, but this is a basic understanding of diversity. And so this is presented by the American Bar Association. Now, of course, you keep hearing the phrase affirmative action thrown around because that's a part of the manipulation, actually. And so, what is affirmative action? You see what the American Bar Association is saying about diversity. Now, let's look very quickly at this idea of affirmative action. And this is offered by Cornell Law School. Affirmative action is defined as a set of procedures designed to, one, eliminate unlawful discrimination among applicants. Okay. Two, remedy the results of such prior discrimination. And number three, and prevent such discrimination in the future. And so the idea behind affirmative action is to address actual discrimination. Okay, it's not simply to have diverse opinion or variety of thought. It's really about stopping wrongs, preventing wrongs, wrongful discrimination, and also righting wrongs that have grown out of past discrimination. Okay, so it's about righting wrongs that have happened in the past. And so you can see how affirmative action is tied to the history related to slavery. Affirmative action is tied to the history related to Jim Crow. And so that's what affirmative action is supposed to be about in theory. In reality, it turns out to be something else in terms of how it has been more recently practiced. And it has morphed into this discussion about diversity. It's not necessarily the same thing because you can have diversity, but it's not necessarily going to right any past wrongs. In fact, the diversity process can actually create a dynamic wherein individuals from diverse backgrounds can receive, these privileges when in fact they might have come from environments where they were in the position of oppressor in their home country. They may be the descendants of the slave, owners. They may be from a higher socioeconomic class, and the individuals who would have benefited from righting some wrongs, those individuals are still back in the countries that they are in, not able to access all of this affirmative action. And so it's important to be very clear about what people are talking about when they are talking about diversity and when they are talking about affirmative action. And it's important for you to make sure that you have them provide that clarity to you. Don't just allow people to use these words interchangeably or these constructs interchangeably, creating a situation where you are confused about what is really going on. And also be mindful of the fact that there's going to be a trickle down impact from this decision related to reparations. And so you need to get that clarity now. Those of you who are talking about reparations, those of you who are talking about indigenous restitution, you need to understand these constructs so that you are better able to discuss your positions. Remember, knowledge is power.